I shall begin with Luke chapter 10, verses 25 to 37. And behold, a certain lawyer stood up and tempted him, saying, Master, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? He said unto him, What is written in the law? How readest thou? And he answering said, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy strength, and with all thy mind, and thy neighbor as thyself. And he said unto him, Thou hast answered right, this do, and thou shalt live. But he, willing to justify himself, said unto Jesus, And who is my neighbor? And Jesus answering said, A certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and fell among thieves, which stripped him of his raiment, and wounded him, and departed, leaving him half dead. And by chance there came down a certain priest that way. And when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. And likewise a Levite, when he was at the place, came and looked on him, and passed by on the other side. But a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion on him, and went to him, and bound up his wound, pouring in oil and wine, and set him on his own beast, and brought him to an inn, and took care of him. And on the morrow, when he departed, he took out 2 pence, and gave them to the host, and said unto him, Take care of him, and whatsoever thou spendest more, when I come again, I will repay thee. Which now of these 3 thinkest thou was neighbor unto him that fell among the thieves? And he said, He that shewed mercy on him. Then said Jesus unto him, Go and do thou likewise. When I searched for the Good Samaritan on the web, it gave me Luke 10, 25 to 37, although the parable of the Good Samaritan does not begin until verse 30. Having read verses 25 to 37, I shall make some remarks on verse 27 as an aside before returning to the Good Enough Samaritan. Abraham Lincoln started attending church after the death of his son. This seems like closing the barn door after the horse is gone, but I shall not question Lincoln's wisdom. As to which church he would attend, he stated, it must prescribe, love God with all your heart and soul, and love your neighbor as yourself, i.e. Luke 10:27. Because of that, the church I grew up in put the words from Luke 10:27 on the wall outside our parish hall, so we could claim Lincoln would have attended our church. Yeah, that's what I thought at the time. When I learned the parable of the Good Samaritan, I was told that Samaritans were considered evil people to the extent that the lawyer said, He that shewed mercy on him, rather than the Samaritan, because he could not associate anything positive with the Samaritan. The lesson we were supposed to learn is that we should judge people as individuals, not by stereotypes associated with them, but by what criteria should we judge them as individuals. Matthew 5:48 says, Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect. But this cannot be achieved. Matthew 18:21 to 22, from which the book and movie 491 takes its title, acknowledges that man will often err. Then came Peter to him and said, Lord, how oft shall my brother sin against me, and I forgive him? Till 7 times? Jesus saith unto him, I say not unto thee until 7 times, but until 70 times 7. The Universalist 1935 Washington Declaration avows our faith in the supreme worth of every human personality, and our current first principle, see, I can refer to them too, is the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Neither mentions the innate baseness and depravity of humans, which goes back to Eve. So the church bids us praise people for good actions without considering what else they have done, as in the parable of the Good Samaritan, of whom we know nothing but the deed in the parable. We do not know how he made his money. In the reading from the lives of the Desert Fathers, we praise the individual for his good acts, despite knowing that he was a thief, and worse than that, is a professional musician. But bad behavior tends to overwhelm good behavior in our judgment, rather than good overwhelming the bad. A star athlete falls out of favor because of a little domestic abuse. Former President Trump might be able to shoot someone in the middle of Fifth Avenue and not lose any votes, but he feared a little marital infidelity being known. Charities will refuse donations if the manner in which the donor raised the funds is suspect. When it was reported that one of my high school English teachers was a pedophile, a classmate remarked that he did not care whether he was a pedophile. He was still a good English teacher. But that is the exception rather than the rule. The more predominant attitude is that Caesar's wife must be beyond suspicion, not just innocent. I am not saying that breaking the law is a criterion for condemning someone. Martin Luther King Jr. wrote in his April 16, 1963 letter from Birmingham City Jail, "I submit that an individual who breaks the law that conscience tells him is unjust and willingly accepts the penalty by staying in jail to arouse the conscience of the community over its injustice is in reality expressing the very highest respect for the law. But that is still a judgment based on a single act as good, rather than based on a complete resume. As an aside, Mahatma Gandhi may have successfully used passive resistance against the British in India, but it would not work in Russia against Putin today. Another place we can see judgment based on a single behavior is in the Faust legend. Goethe, in what is interpreted as a Protestant interpretation, begins with a prologue in heaven where God says, "Man is bound to err the while he strives," and concludes with the angel saying, "Whoso with fervent will strives on, we angels can deliver." That is to say, it does not matter how much man sins, as long as his ultimate intent is good. This contradicts that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Good intentions are all that you need. Marlowe, which what is considered a Catholic interpretation, concludes with the damnation of Faust. Faustus is gone. Regard his hellish fall, whose fiendful fortune may exhort the wise only to wonder at unlawful things, whose deepness doth entice such forward wits to practice more than heavenly power permits. That is to say, there is no possibility of salvation once one has sinned. It is more difficult to judge if we do not rely on a single extreme, but make a measured judgment, as Daniel 5:27 tells us to do. The King James Version tells us that the single word tekel means thou art weighed in the balances and art found wanting. Searching the web, I found that tekal means to weigh, and kal means to be light or wanting. When I study Akkadian, I was told that a double consonant could be represented with either a single or double consonant, but there was no mention of a repeated syllable being represented with a single syllable. But who am I to question biblical scholars? Indeed, being weighed in the balance and found wanting could be just that there is not enough good, but we usually think of a balance as good versus evil. The measured judgment of whether breaking the law can be justified often comes down to Bertolt Brecht's question, which is the bigger crime, to rob a bank or to own one? I have a t-shirt with that on it, but I didn't think it would be appropriate to wear it for the whole service. And I've never worn it going into a bag. When we celebrate Robin Hood, we judge owning the bank the bigger crime. Passive resistance would not have worked against the High Sheriff of Nottinghamshire. The High Sheriff of Nottinghamshire was so hated that one provision of the Magna Carta barred him from holding office. In America, Pretty Boy Floyd is less well known, but according to Woody Guthrie, but many a starving farmer, the same old story told, how the outlaw paid their mortgage and saved their little home. Actually, the web says he did not pay their mortgages, but burned them when he robbed banks. Pastor Emma said that when giving a sermon, there should be a concise message the auditors can take home with them. I am not sure I can provide that, but I shall make some effort in that direction. I asked Karen to read The Blind Men and the Elephant. There weren't any men in the story she read, well, but that's the original story in any event, because it illustrates that more data is better. One manifestation of this is, do not judge an individual based on a single action. Do not let a single good deed or bad deed overwhelm your judgment. Judge the entire individual. But perhaps more important is for your judgment to follow religion's tendency to let the good overwhelm the bad, rather than man's tendency to let the bad overwhelm the good. An example of this is that when working with another person, whether a subordinate or colleague, it will usually benefit you more to exploit their strengths than to criticize their weaknesses. And if you make judgment based only on bad acts, later reflection might be similar to that of Rudyard Kipling. Yes, din, 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 you Lazarushian leather, Gunga din, though I belted you and flayed you by the living God that made you, you're a better man than I am, Gunga din.